Welcome to codeLive. Today we are going to learn how to build a plugin for the Salesforce CLI. My name is Julian Duque. I'm a principal developer advocate here at Salesforce, and I've been creating some content around Node.js and JavaScript for you all Salesforce developers. One of those projects that we have that uses JavaScript a lot, it is the Salesforce CLI. We have been taking a look at certain different other code lives. The previous code live I presented, I guide you how to build a CLI application using a framework called codeLive. codeLive was built by Heroku, and it is the same framework we use to build both the Salesforce CLI and the Heroku CLI. So all the concepts you learn from those code lives are going to be used today, right? So if you haven't seen those videos, go ahead to our YouTube channel, take a look on the playlist, and we already have a playlist ready for you. Or you can also take a look at a blog post that I created for you. So remember that we have the Salesforce Developers website at developer.salesforce.com. Here you can find a lot of different information for developers, like the blog post, all our videos, and the developer resources, podcast, and the developer documentation. The blog post I'm mentioning, it's called Building a CLI Application with codeLive. You can take a look. This is the written tutorial, how to build that application, how a command works, what is the structure of a command. And remember that we created a CLI application that let you create tasks both locally and fetch and synchronize those tasks with Salesforce and fetch tasks from Salesforce as well. To perform the connection with Salesforce, if I go to the blog post a little bit further down, we used a couple of open source libraries that are created by Salesforce. Those open source libraries come on the package called Salesforce Core. This Salesforce Core package contains all the basic functionality that a CLI application needs to communicate with Salesforce. But here what we did was using these libraries as a standalone library to create an authentication information and to create a connection to an org. And then we were able to use that connection to query our database. So today we are going to build a plugin that is going to be using these same objects, but now from the Salesforce CLI framework. So there is a specific framework that the Salesforce CLI uses to build plugins. So let's take a look first at how the Salesforce CLI is structured. I'm going to be showing you the open source repository with all the different plugins that exist. And remember that we have two different CLIs. We have the SFDX and we have the new one, which is SF. That its main goal is to have all of the different CLIs from all of our products like Functions, Heroku, MuleSoft, etc. under one CLI. And you can see SF as the evolution of SFDX. But we are getting there. SFDX still gets a lot of love and a lot of new features. Today, they release an awesome feature that you should take a look at it. I'm going to be mentioning that later. But all of these plugins and the Salesforce CLI is an open source project. And we can rely on those libraries to build our own CLI plugins to extend the functionality of the Salesforce CLI. Before getting into the code, before getting into these things, I'm going to recommend a video I recorded for you. It's a developer quick take that you can find also on our YouTube channel. when I show you how to use SF to perform day-to-day developer operations, how to create a Scratch org, how to deploy metadata, how to retrieve metadata, how to log in into an organization. So it is a good way to start like getting familiar with SF. So let's take a look at the different projects that exist on the Salesforce CLI open source repository. This organization, you can find it on GitHub, and let me increase the zoom so you see better. You can find the Salesforce CLI org at GitHub. Here, you will find both the SFDX CLI and the SF CLI. So here you have the source code for both different commands. And a status is the one that we are going to be using today. Shows you the list of all the different plugins that are available for the Salesforce CLI. And why I mentioned that these plugins are available for the Salesforce CLI? Since both SFDX and SF uses the same framework, both uses Oak Cliff, these plugins are going to be compatible either with SFDX or SF. The plugin we are going to write today, you can install it either on SFDX or on SF. Cool. So previously on our previous codeLives, we saw the plugin authentication to allow us to authenticate against an org. And we took a look at this very important one, which is the core. Let me take a look at the core. SFDX core, which is the one that contains all of those objects and classes that lets you create an authentication information, create a connection, and perform these operations against Salesforce org. If you go to this project, here in the README, it will give you access to the API documentation and also some information how to write tests while writing a CLI plugin. If you are going to either contribute to this open source project or create your own plugins, you will need to create tests. But I am not going to be discussing tests. Maybe if we have time, we will be able to create a test for our project. But my partner, Mohit, he is going to teach you how to create tests for Salesforce CLI plugins on December 1st. Don't miss his codeLive because he's going to show you how to create tests for Salesforce CLI plugins. We are interested here in the API documentation. Here in the API documentation, you can find the different methods and objects that we are going to be using. For today's plugin, we will use only the connection. But what are we going to build today? So, as Salesforce developers, we need to have access to the REST API. Usually when we are creating a project or when we are interacting with Salesforce, we use the REST API. So you have two ways, well, three ways to interact with the Salesforce API. You can use Postman, which is a graphical user interface to perform all of the different requests against the Salesforce APIs. You can use Workbench, which is a little bit outdated, but it still works on a Salesforce org. Or you can use Coral. In the chat, if you want to interact with me, tell me if you ever have used Coral to query the Salesforce CLI. If you have used Coral, let me know. I want to know your experience about using Coral. What is Coral? Coral is an HTTP client on the terminal. So here on the terminal on the console, you are going to use Coral to perform HTTP requests. But Coral is a little bit complex while dealing with complex CLI requests. Because we will need to specify headers, we need to pass the authentication token, we need to specify a lot of different parameters to make a valid request against the Salesforce CLI. So we have an example here. And we are using curl to perform a post against the account object. So we have the full Salesforce instance URL with the API path. It's telling me that we are going to use the REST API using the version 56. And then the path that we are going to be using is the SObjects account. So we are getting this specific resource. Then we need to pass an access token. Then we need to specify that the content type of our request is of JSON. And then we pass a file that contains the payload that I'm going to be storing. And then we'll specify the method. So it is a little bit complex. For example, if we have a full authentication token, it is not giving me any developer experience. So I was talking with my manager, Peter Chidum, that maybe you know him. He has been working in the Salesforce ecosystem for a while, and he is also a developer advocate, about what would be like a cool Salesforce plugin that we can implement for this codeLive. And he told me, I have an idea that I've been wanting to implement it for a while, and it is just create a plugin to perform HTTP API requests against Salesforce on a very simple way. So let's make the live and the developer experience of our Salesforce developers easier by creating this plugin. So today, what we are going to do is create a plugin from scratch to perform REST API operations against Salesforce. So, are we ready to start building this plugin? Join me. What we need is Node.js environment installed in our computer, Visual Studio Code, and obviously we will need to have the Salesforce CLI installed. SFDX or SF. I always recommend to you to use the latest version. If you are not running maybe on a certain specific production environments that you need a set specific version of the Salesforce CLI, but for development purposes, always use the latest one. You are going to get the performance improvements and the new features. We also have the plugin developer guide in our developer documentation. Here you can find all of the different resources that are going to guide you on how to create a Salesforce plugin. I pretty much follow this guide to create the plugin that we are going to be creating today here live. So go ahead, take a look at the documentation, check all of the different resources. There are like more things covered in the documentation than the things I'm going to be covering here today on this codeLive. So this is a great resource for you. All of these resources and links are going to be shared on the description of the video when we publish it after the stream. So checking the chat right now. I'm seeing Clayman tuning from Venezuela, Harshit from India. We have Rohit, we have Tiezue. Glad to have all of these amazing people joining to this codeLive. And let's start. Okay, before getting into building this plugin, I mentioned to you that it's a good practice to have the updated SFDX version. So for that, you can run SFDX update. I already did it this morning, so I should have the latest version. And one cool thing about these newer versions of the Salesforce CLI is that you can run the what's new command to check the changelog. Pretty much what's new command is going to tell you all the new features that has been added to that specific version. So one of my favorite features that got introduced November 10th is today on this version is a string replacement. So for certain projects, you might need to replace values using environment variables or some strings. This is amazing for you because with this new project, you can replace those values without affecting the source code. These values are going to be changed while you deploy the code. So very good for configuration purposes. So take a look at these new cool things that are being added to the SFDX CLI. And also you can execute the same what's new command on the SF CLI. And it's going to be showing you also the new features that are being added to that specific command. And this was released yesterday. Okay, so how can we start creating our plugin? The same SFDX CLI has a plugin that it's called the plugin generator. The plugin generator will allow us to create a new project that has some scaffold code that contains a single simple plugin. We are going to be reusing that code to create our REST API plugin. How can we generate a project? So let's use SFDX, plugins, generate, and give it a name of a project. I'm going to name this project REST CLI. This will generate a project. Let's create a package name for this. I'm going to be calling it REST CLI. Maybe in the future I want to publish this package into NPM so a lot of other people uses. And I'm going to be doing this after I fix a couple of things on the project I've been working on, so anybody can use it. The script description, REST API plugin for the Salesforce CLI. I am the author. The version is going to be 1.1, license MIT. The owner of the repo is Julian Duque, and let's call REST CLI as the repository. So this is creating a project. Right now, it's installing all of the different dependencies. And after having these, we will be able to start coding and modifying that specific project to have our REST command. So let's give it a time while it installs all of the dependencies. As you can see on the screen, we are using a lot of Oakleaf. So this is the same framework we already used. So we will be using also the same documentation as well. There are like certain things that has been improved because the Salesforce CLI created a framework on top of Oakleaf to simplify some operations. For example, get the default user of a specific SFDX configuration, get the default org or the default dev hub, so we don't need to specify certain parameters while using this command. So all of those things have been made easier by this plugin framework that the Salesforce CLI team created. Okay, give it a time. It's still building the package. Once it builds the package, I'm going to be opening the code. So let me go to the folder. This is on codeLive CLI, REST CLI. Okay, let me open Visual Studio Code. Opening Visual Studio Code. And let me confirm that we have good zoom. Yes, I think we have good zoom. So, if you attended the Building a CLI Application with Oakleaf codeLive, you will remember that there is a source folder. That source folder contains a commands folder. In the commands folder, you can have multiple subfolders. Each subfolder is considered a topic. A topic is just an aggregation of different commands. Or you can create a specific file on the root command folder or the main folder that is going to be just considered as a standalone command. So we are going to follow the second approach. We are not going to create a topic. We are just going to create just a single command. But before starting creating that single command, let's take a look at what is being created by default with this generator. So let's open the hello org command. So the hello org command, before we check the source code, let's execute it. I'm going to be using the terminal for this better. So remember, to execute the development version of an Oakleaf command or a plugin, you are going to use bindev. This is giving you the basic execution of what you are building. And here we have the help. So we have a topic called hello. We can use the topic hello. It will give me the help for that specific topic. It doesn't have any help. Awesome. Let me see if with the flag help it will work. Okay, with the flag help it worked because we don't have the plugins help that comes with the Salesforce CLI, because we are building a standalone plugin here. So pretty much it's telling me that we can execute this by running hello colon and the name of the command, which is org. So let's run hello org to see what we have. Okay, awesome. So this is giving us the following. It's printing out hello world. It's giving me the name of the org, and it's giving me the ID of the org. As you can see, I have not passed any username. I have not passed anything specific to this command. It is implying the username and implying the org from the framework. And I think I can pass some flags. So let's take a look at the help of that specific command. And I can pass the flag name and a target username if I want to change it. So let's, for example, execute with the flag name, pass it codeLive, and let's see what's going on here. It will do something. Okay, hello codeLive, and this is the same org. Let's take a look at the source code, because I don't want to miss a lot of time, and we want to build something today. Okay, so what we have here, instead of getting the command from Oakleaf, we are getting the command from the Salesforce command library. So this is the framework that Salesforce created for us to build plugins. So here we will be able to create the flags and to have the SFDX command class to extend our specific command. We have some other utilities. For example, if you saw Oakleaf, all of the strings were in the same file. Right now, we are going to use the messages framework to store all of the different strings outside of our source code. So we can have all of the different messages on a JSON, and this is going to become a better maintainable source code because you don't need to change any string. Go into different source files, you have one source of truth to specify those flags as well. So this is a great way to configure the messages for your CLI. Okay, so we are importing the messages. Then right now we are loading the messages. So we are loading the messages that are contained on that org.json file. And then we create our command. The command is org, extends the SFDX command class. And this is the way we are getting the messages. So the description, we have the getMessage method. The examples, remember that we can specify a list of examples. These examples are right now on an array. So we can have multiple examples here as an array. But how are we reading this information in the examples string? Pretty much by getting the string or the array and splitting the array by the end of line of the specific operating system we are using. Remember that Windows and Linux and Mac, all of them has a different a character for the end of line. So we are using Node.js to get the proper end of line depending on the operating system we are running the command. We are specifying the name argument. No, we are specifying the file argument, and we are also specifying the different flags. We have two flags, name and force. This is the same flags that we defined were specified with Oakleaf. And then there are like some configuration parameters. For example, this command requires the username. So we say true because we need the username to connect to an org. This supports the DevHub username. So are we going to let pass the DevHub username? Sure, why not? We can pass that as a true. And the requires project if this command needs to be run on a specific Salesforce project. For example, if you are building something to format your project, to deploy a specific part of your project, for example, for simplify deployment processes, that will require a project. Right now, our command doesn't require a project. Okay, we implement the run command, and we just get the logic. We get the different flags, but this is where all the beautiful things happen. We are getting the connection from the org that it's already implied by the framework. So depending on the flag you are passing as the username, it implies the org for you and gives you an authenticated connection against Salesforce. You don't need to do anything here. Remember on our previous episode, we need to do some magic to create the connection. Now the connection is created for you. And now you can perform a query. This query will return a result, and you can do whatever you want with the result. And this is pretty much what we are doing. If we have expiration date, it will show the expiration date. And if it's a hub org or a DevHub org, we can also show that ID, etc. So let's now create our own command. This is a good way to start building our commands. What I'm going to do is to copy this file, delete the source code that we are not going to use, and start building up our command. In the meantime, I'm going to be on the chat checking. Can you also do a session on CI/CD setup using Circle CI? Harshit, stay at the end. I'm going to give you great news because the couple next codeLives are going to be about CI/CD with Philip Ozil. Okay, hello, Gail. You recently started working on a plugin. You failed to import messages from other plugins. True comment seems to imply it can be done. How to load messages from standard plugins. I need to take a look. If you want, or if you can, find me on Twitter. Send me a message so we can figure this out of the string, okay? Cool. Let's copy the org command. I'm going to be copying the org command, pasting the command on the root. Okay. And let's rename this to rest. So what I want to build is something like this. So I want to build a command that pretty much receive a path, for example, as objects, account, describe, and it will return a predefined JSON with the API call. Or if I want to create an object, I can say, for example, okay, let's pass a post method and let's pass a payload, for example, with the name of the account, right? And it will do the magic for us. It will create the account for us and it will return the ID. This is pretty much what I want to implement. This is going to be kind of similar to curl, but we are not passing the authentication token and we are not passing any specific header, so we don't need to worry about the HTTP constructs. We are just passing the URL like the path of the specific resource and the other parameters. As you can see here, I am not passing the full URL. I'm just passing the path because I'm implying the org by the authenticated or the default authenticated user that I have right now. So let's see how can we do this. Cool. I have this rest command, so let's start modifying the code. First, let's change the name from org to rest. Also, I'm going to getting the messages from a rest file, so I need to also copy the messages, paste here, and change these to rest. Awesome. So command description. This is perform a HTTP REST API request. Awesome. So I'm getting that command description. Examples. Let's create those examples that I pass there. So SF res slash s objects, for example. Or I can pass another example. Let's say SF rest s objects account with the method post and the payload name my account. Awesome. This is a good way to show the different examples. We are not going to use a force flag or a name flag and no error. Okay. But what we want to pass is the argument description is going to be the path description. This is important. The path to the resource. Cool. So the argument for us is going to be the path. So remember that the argument is pretty much the order value that I'm passing to the command, that it is not a flag. If you go to the blog post I wrote about building CLI commands, there is an useful graphic at the beginning that is showing you the arguments to a command and the flags and the difference between those two. Okay, so we need the path as the argument, and so far the flag I'm going to use, it's called the method. Okay, so it's going to be a string. The single character is going to be M. The description, I'm getting it from method flag description. So let's pass a method flag description, the HTTP method. This is not required, so I'm going to be specifying some default value. By default is going to be get. And what options can I pass? Get, post, put, patch, and delete. I don't think we use pod in our API. I need to go and confirm, but let's say that we are going to be using these specific methods. This is giving us validation. So if we pass a different method, the plugin is going to fail. Also, path needs to be required. So let's say that the path is required. And we can also pass a description. Description, path description. It's called like this, path description, yes. Awesome. It requires the username, DevHub username. It doesn't require a project, and that's it. Let's delete everything because we don't need anything else here. We are going to start from scratch. Don't suggest anything. And let's return an empty object. And we don't need the error so far. So what we need to get here is the path from the arcs. And we need to get the method from the flags. And now let's print both the path and the method to see if this is working. Okay, let's execute the command. Bin deb rest, give me the help. Give me the help. Awesome, it's giving me the help. We have the examples. It's giving me the full command, how to call it. I have some parameters here, the method, the target username, the target DevOps username, the API version. Awesome, so we don't need to work to do anything with the API version, and return the information as JSON. Okay. So if we call, for example, as objects, what happens? It prints out that I'm going to be performing a request to the as objects resource, and the method is get. Cool. So we are going on a right direction here. What do we need to do next? So next, we need to have a connection. So I'm getting a connection from the org property of the specific command. So now I have a connection, and then from the connection, in the example that we have here, the connection is doing a query, but we are not going to perform a query. We need to perform an API request. So how can we perform an API request? So I ask myself this question, and I remember that the Salesforce CLI framework uses JSForce. So JSForce, if you don't know what that is, JSForce is a wonderful SDK for JavaScript to develop Salesforce applications. So if you go to the documentation of JSForce, there is a connection object. So I wanted to see if from the Salesforce CLI, I was able to get this connection object. And the connection object, if we go to the API reference and we check here the connection object, we can see that there is a request method. So let me search for the request method. Yes. So we have a request method. So this request method is used internally to send REST API requests with all the HTTP information. You can pass a full URL, you can pass a relative path from root, or you can pass a relative path from version root. And does this look familiar to you? It's pretty much what we want to do. Use this method to perform the API call. So I went to the Salesforce core documentation. I went to the connection object. So there we have, where is the connection? Connection. Yes, org connection. Then I opened the class and it gave me very good documentation. So this is how can I use the connection object. And these are the different methods I have access to. And there is the request method. So I have access to the request method from the connection object. So that's the one we are going to use. Okay, so let's perform the request. This is thinking for us. So let's create a response. Awesome. So the response object, we are going to pass a method. We are going to pass a URL, which is going to be the path. What else do we have here? We don't have anything else. Cool. And then we can log the response. Let's log the response. We have an error here. It says, argument of type unknown is not assignable to the parameter of type string. So I'm going to get this response as any. So as any type. So we don't have any error here. This is TypeScript, so we can like specify this is any type, and let's try to print this out. I know internally that this is giving me a string. It's parsing what it's coming from the connection request. So I safely can print this out. So let's execute this. Bring as objects. What do you think? Is this going to work? Look at that. Look at that. But let's bring something more simple. Let's bring the list of the different resources I can start like requesting from the Salesforce CLI. Awesome. And now we get the response from the Salesforce CLI. The tooling metadata, so we can use the tooling API, the metadata API just from our terminal. We can make this a little bit better. Let's change log for a style JSON. A style JSON does not exist on type REST. Style JSON does not exist on type REST. Okay, so oh no, it's this style JSON. Awesome. So this is the method we are going to use from the UX object. The UX object is the one that we use to render tables or to create the spinners. Remember that we used this on the previous episodes. And now it is embedded on the Salesforce CLI framework, so we don't need to import anything. So now if I print this out, it should be a colored JSON. Awesome. So now it looks better. Let's see if the parameter works. What happens if I pass the API version to 42? If I pass the API version to 42, now you see that it's giving me the URLs using the API 42. So this is working. This is giving me a lot of things already made. I can pass a target username. Let's use a different org. This should use a different org right now, that an org that I am authenticated against it, and it's working. If I use something that it doesn't exist, what happens? It should give me an error. Exactly. No authorization information found for that specific user. So now we can see that some things that we implement by ourselves, usually while building this type of applications, are already solved for us. Okay, so we still need a couple things. So far, I'm able to perform GET requests. What if I want to send either a JSON payload or an XML payload? Why not? We might want to send something on XML. So for that, we need two different flags. We're going to create a content type flag. This content type flag, let's create a small charge. It's going to be C or T. What sounds better for content type? T, because type. Description, content type flag description. We can create it here. The content type. Awesome. This is not required, so I need to specify a default value. Let's say this is JSON. Let's simplify it, just JSON. And the options, JSON and XML. So I would be able to specify the content type as JSON or XML. Content type is the value that I am sending to the request, not the value that I'm getting. Sadly, you can also specify, for example, the value you are getting as XML, but internally Salesforce parses that XML into a JSON object. I tried to get the full XML response, but sadly the internals of Salesforce parse that into a JSON object. So we are pretty much dealing with JSON output, but we can send XML input. And what else? Let's create a payload. So the payload is pretty much what we are going to send. Payload, let's say that it's P, the character. Let's create a description. Payload flag description. This is the payload. Okay. And what else? Do we need any specific option for the payload? I don't think so. No default value. If the payload doesn't exist, we don't send anything. Cool. So we need to get two things here. One, it's building the content type. Content type. So const content type. It's getting the flag, but we need to automatically pass the application to the meme type. So if you go to the REST CLI documentation here on the request and resources, it's giving you that the content type can be either application JSON or application XML. So what I'm doing is, for developer experience purposes, I'm just letting you pass either JSON or XML. So you don't need to pass the full header type or the full content type, just the type of the object you are going to work with. And then I construct that header for you. So let's now pass a header subject, and let's pass the content type. And last but not least, let's pass a body from the payload. So if it is null, it's going to ignore this value. If it's undefined, it's going to ignore this value. That's how JavaScript works. And what are we going to return? What is return here? Return here is used when we execute the command passing the JSON flag. If we pass the JSON flag, we are getting not the color JSON output, but a raw JSON output. So this is useful if we are going to use this plugin or this command, for example, on a CI/CD workflow. So let's return the response. That's what are we returning here, pretty much the response. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. What else? Let me see how this works. So let's execute this command. Rest as objects account with the method post with the content type JSON and with the payload empty. What happens? This should validate. Okay, now we have an error. The media type. Oh, come on! I messed this up. I didn't use the proper template string, so I'm not extracting the value. Now I'm extracting the value. Yes, Gail, thank you very much. That's why it failed. Gail, was that Copilot prompting your flag option members? Yes, Copilot is doing all the magic. I must say, Copilot is interesting. It has made my productivity better while doing certain repetitive tasks. Sometimes it fails, so you will need to know what you are doing, but it's very good for auto-completing stuff. So Copilot is a good thing. I am paying for this feature for if you wanna know. I have this on my GitHub account. Okay. What were we doing? This. Okay, let's post this object as JSON. Required fields are missing name. Oh, it's doing the validation for me. Awesome. So let's pass a name, and the name is going to be codeLive. So we are creating a new account called codeLive. And it works. So it created the account. So we simplified our curl commands by writing a plugin. And we will be able to perform a query maybe. Yes, let's do a query. A REST query, pass a query, select name from account where ID equals. Can I pass that ID in there? Is this going to work? Am I missing something? Yes, it needs to be a string. So let me change these to double quotes. I haven't tried this, as you can see. So let me see if this works. This is giving me the account. And it is giving me the account we already created, codeLive. Awesome. This is great. So our plugin works. We can also, as I told you, we can create this account using XML. So instead of passing the content type of JSON, we can pass an XML and say, for example, account, name, codeLive XML, name, account. Let's close it. And this should work as well. It works. So I can query all the objects. Query. Let's get the names. Select name from account. And return this as a JSON object. So not colored, but as a JSON object. And after having this, we will be able to extract the result response records. Okay, so let's extract that using JQ response result records. And from records, let's get the name property. Cannot iterate over null, so no, it's result response records. What is not working? Yeah, for some reason it is not extracting the JSON here. But you get the idea. I was trying to use another CLI tool to get the result of this command. Oh, it is result response. So it's the other way around. Result response records. Okay. And it will give me the names that are on my Salesforce account. As you can see, there is the codeLive XML that we just created. Fantastic. So we created the Salesforce CLI plugin. What's next? Installing the plugin on our CLI. So you can publish this plugin to npm by doing npm publish. Or let me see if we have a command here on the package.json that does that for us. Yes, it has the build to build the project, and it has a pack version to build the project before pushing it into npm. But we are not going to publish in this, or should we? What do you say? Should we publish this or not? Let me see. Let's build the plugin to see if we don't have any issues with it. We don't have any issues, and we are going to install the plugin locally by running sf plugins link. So this is linking the plugin that I have on my local instance of sfdx. So now I will be able to execute this command from sfdx. Let's see if it works. I tried and I failed sometimes, but I have it installed on SF, so I can show you how it looks like on the SF CLI. Let's see if it works here, and if it works, I'm going to publish it. That sounds good. Yeah, why not? But of course, I need to do some other stuff like writing the tests, improving the documentation, removing that hello plugin because we don't need the hello on the plugin we are going to be releasing. So this initial release might not be good. So I'm going to push into npm and then I'm going to delete it. But let's see if it works. So let's give it a time. I'm installing it on the SFDX CLI, but here I can show you on the SF CLI. So on the SF CLI, I already have the REST command installed. This is one that I built off a screen. And this one, it's already on the CLI, but now my computer is so slow. Okay, now I have it here. So as you can see, now this command is part of SF, so I can run SF rest / and it will perform the API call from the specific CLI tool. So now the plugin is installed on my CLI tool, not being run from the project folder. And I missed something on the project. You saw this? You saw that we have like a spinner while it loads the HTTP request. We can implement that really quick, right? We can implement that really quick here. Let's do this UX start spinner. Executing method to request 10, and then this UX stop spinner. Done. Okay, let's run the development version because the production version doesn't have it. Rest / and it should have the spinner that we just implemented. Oh, yes, it has the spinner. So it's super fast, but you saw it there. And let's see if now SFDX has the REST command, and SFDX has this REST command. And last but not least is publishing to npm, so you will need to run npm publish. And of course, you will need to have an npm account. And since security is first, my npm account will ask me for a two-factor authentication code that I'm going to be fetching from here. Please close your eyes. Nah, it's unless you do something in 1 minute and you know my password, I am in no risk. Okay, this is my code. Awesome. I just published the REST CLI plugin to npm. Let's take a look. Let's go to npm and let's go to Julian Duque REST CLI. And this is the project. Published a few seconds ago. I published it private. So maybe you are not going to see it because I had the private flag enabled. But here is the information. Now the plugin, if I made it public, it's going to be available for all of you folks. And that's it for now. Thank you very much for joining me on this codeLive, and I hope you learned a lot how to build the Salesforce CLI plugin and the Salesforce CLI framework. Remember, go and take a look at the resources, specifically the Salesforce CLI plugin developer guide is going to give you all the information you need to build a Salesforce plugin. And also remember that Salesforce plugins and the Salesforce CLI is built using Oakleaf, the Open CLI framework. Stay tuned because next week we are going to have 2 codeLives. The first codeLive is Flow for Developers with Alba Riva and 2 amazing guests. And then you are going to learn about advanced platform events and change data capture events with Philippe Ozil. So stay tuned next week on codeLive. You are going to have like twice the value. Okay. Awesome. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.